Hey, how's it going? I'm Shivani. I'm a journalist, a former physicist, and occasional stand-up comic. And it's a bit weird trying to do this at the moment all virtually. Like, I'm really grateful to AKT for asking me to be involved in this event. But it's a bit weird because I don't have any of the right equipment. Like, I'd normally at least have a microphone, and this is not that. This is actually my vibrator. And while it's not actually doing anything here for you guys, it's been doing a lot for me recently, so massive props. I never know what to do with my hands at these things. But when lockdown first started, I really did think that as a dyke, I would be completely fine because let's be honest, we've been preparing for this since days began, you know? All I need to do is a flannel shirt, and I've got you covered for any sort of plumbing, electrical, DIY, home issue. I don't need anyone coming in and out of my house. All I need is the flannel on and I'm pretty much prepared for any eventuality. And another reason I thought I'd be completely fine. I kind of decided that I could rewatch the whole of the L Word because that's like 60 hours of TV without even counting the pausing and the playing when I'm hanging out with this. And I won't even need to watch it under the covers in the dark, hiding from my parents, like with headphones on, and like making the computer vulnerable to about a million different viruses, because now that I'm an adult I can watch it like in the middle of the day, and I just feel like that will bring a whole new creative side to the story, and maybe it'll make me hate Jenny a little bit less.
Talking, laughing, loving, breathing, fighting, fucking, crying, drinking, writing, winning, losing, cheating, kissing, thinking, dreaming.
Probably not though. And for everyone who's coupled up, this has never been a more socially acceptable time to U-Haul. I really thought I was going to be fine. I also, as I said, have a physics degree. So, I mean, I'm used to not hanging out with my peers. But this lockdown has been hard for me in a different way because I'm brown, as you can see, and as I've said, I didn't become a doctor. And that just brought the most amount of dishonour to my family.
Dishonor on you? Dishonor on your cow?
Oh, but I should specify that in my family, it's only a doctor of medicine that counts as being a doctor. Even if I've done a PhD, it doesn't really count.
A PhD is a doctorate. It's literally describing a doctor.
Maybe let's refocus.
No, the problem here is that medical practitioners have co-opted the word doctor.
Okay, Captain.
Now, I know we live in a world where anything can mean anything, and nobody even cares about etymology.
And that's the true reason why I haven't done a PhD. Definitely not because I'm not smart enough to. Anyway, 7 years later, my mum still isn't over it. She's always calling me up and going,
Auntie just told me I may save 7 lives today. What did you do?
and I'm just like,
Saw tiger, now I understand. I saw tiger, tiger saw man.
Anyway, so after physics, I decided I want to be in a career that was a little bit more fast and loose with the facts. I'm joking. As a journalist, we do not play fast and loose with the facts, and I'm definitely going to get fired faster than you can say £350 million a week to fund our NHS. No, but really, like on a serious note, the NHS has been doing incredible work during the pandemic, and it's been continuously underfunded, had money and resources stripped away from it. And I'm actually finding it quite insulting the way people are raising money for the NHS like it's some sort of charity. I'm making a monthly donation. It's fucking called taxes. And to all the Karens out there who keep going, the NHS needs to be properly funded, don't fucking tell Twitter, go tell the polls. That's it from me. Have a happy isolation, and please do try to look after yourself, both mentally and physically.
You can't even make your roti sound.
Hey, I'm Shivani. I'm a journalist and occasional stand-up comic. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a South Asian bisexual woman, which I think is important to always point out in terms of inclusivity and diversity, which is something I'm really passionate about. In both my comedy and my stand-up, I really try and push these themes of being inclusive and trying to find stories that aren't generally covered by the mainstream media so much, and try to get voices heard and people seen and listened to that we wouldn't normally hear from on platforms like the BBC, which is where I work. Stand-up is important to me for two reasons. One, I think stand-up can provide me with a slightly different way of looking at the world. So in my day job, I'm constantly surrounded by the news cycle and constantly doing all sorts of things that can be quite doom and gloom and can take its toll on my mental health. And stand-up lets me just look at the world in a slightly different way and laugh about what's going on and think about the fact that there are good pockets in a bad day, and sometimes bad days can be the best material too. But two, my other reason for really thinking stand-up's important is because I think that if I can get on stage as a brown, bisexual, South Asian, queer woman, I can and get people laughing along, especially people who aren't necessarily from some of those intersections or any of those intersections. I think it can allow people to see my experiences from a different point of view, where they are taking in the information that I'm telling them, but also feeling good about it themselves. So they might laugh at my jokes, but then go home and think about what the structural inequalities that are in place that have made those situations occur in order for me to have those experiences. That's probably not what they do. They probably laugh, get drunk and go home. But I hope at least one person in a crowd will go home and think about what I've said a little bit more. I think in all the work that I do, I try and promote diversity and inclusion as much as possible. And as tired as the phrase is, diversity and inclusion, I think there is definitely a need for us to keep fighting for it and championing it as much as possible until people from the whole range of minority communities get that seat at the table that they deserve. And I do that with journalism by trying to constantly find contributors and stories and ideas from people who wouldn't necessarily normally be platformed on a place like the BBC, and I constantly am trying to look for new experiences and new voices. So if you have any stories that you want to share, just DM me. I don't know if there's a thing, my name in the bio, whatever, I don't know, but find me, Shivani Dave, spelled Dave, it's pronounced Dave, and let me know. But also with comedy, I think if you can get people who aren't necessarily from your community and or your section of intersections to laugh along with your jokes and understand your experiences from a light-hearted point of view, I feel like the more people are going to laugh at your jokes, the more willing they are to engage with you, and around that you can sort of start to create a conversation about why those experiences occur and how we can try and tear down those structures that are in place that hinder people like me. And I think that's really important, and that's something I just try and promote. And probably nobody thinks about my comedy being that deep, but hopefully maybe one day it will be. Some news sources can be biased, and that's because a lot of the time publications or journalists or editors or newspapers as a whole have political leanings that they want to propagate. And so what I try to do to try and get a balanced source of news is read from a wide selection of news sites, and try and distill that information and deconstruct why certain articles might be written in the way that they've been written. But that can be a lot of work. A slightly easier way to do that would be to go to news agencies rather than newspapers, things like Reuters and the Associated Press, and read what they are writing in usually a very matter-of-fact way, without so much flair or editorial bias. I mean, the BBC is supposed to be as impartial and down the middle as it comes, and there is that constant thing of it being too left or too right, depending on who thinks what. But it's good to know that the BBC is being attacked in the same way on the left and on the right. So it is, I think, on the whole, trying to do a really good job of remaining impartial. And I mean, the people who write these articles are also human beings and do sometimes get things wrong and do sometimes misprint or make mistakes, and usually the BBC is really good and really transparent with correcting those mistakes and explaining what mistakes were made and why the correction's been put in place. But I would try and just get a balanced sense of the news. I wouldn't get all of my news from one source. I definitely wouldn't get all of my news from Twitter or Instagram, but I would go to the actual source and try and find out exactly what was written and why it was written, because a screen grab can only tell you so much and takes a lot of things out of context if you don't get the whole article, which can sometimes lead to problematic things. And also, you know, I've seen recently a lot of older articles being resurfaced which are out of date, and things like that on social media, whereas if you go straight to the news website, you can see the date it was published and whether or not there were any updates to the article, and you can work it out for yourself as to whether or not what you're reading is necessarily what was the intended message, or what you're reading was as it says, because I just think that you'll get a more rounded, balanced opinion of journalism that way. But reading the news like that can be really sad at times. It often does seem doom and gloom, and it can make you quite angry if you read articles by people who may have deliberately slanted things in one way or another that you might not agree with. And more than anything, constantly reading about negative things going on in the world can really take its toll on your mental health. And so I would also recommend not dwelling too much on the news. And this is a real problem that I have. Even if it's a story I'm not working on and I see something that catches my eye and I want to know more about it, I'll go down a rabbit hole and end up spending 2 hours reading, you know, articles dating all the way back to the 90s about this one story, and it can end up driving you a little bit up the wall. And I would really recommend finding your trusted news sources from the places that are going to give you real information and not make it too politicised any one way or another, because that politicisation is then up to you, and engaging with it on a small basis, so in little chunks rather than constantly throughout the day and getting stressed out by it. So I have this hard and fast rule that when I'm on the phone to my friends after work, I will not talk about anything to do with the C word, coronavirus. Like, that's just not something that I'm going to talk about, because I've dealt with it all day and don't want to have to deal with it anymore. But you know, some people find that they would like to read the news in the evening before bed, and I'd say just stick a timer on it. Say, I'm going to look at the news for 10 minutes, catch up on the headlines, see what the biggest bits are, and just read that and stick with it. Try to really like control what you consume, which is really easy to not do when someone shares links to articles throughout the day, and you might want to just click on the link and see what's going on. But I personally read the news in the morning and obviously work in news all day, but then will read global news stories in the evening, so I can sort of catch up and see what's been going on around the world, because I don't work in that area at the moment. But try to just really control how much I consume, and try and consume news from a trusted source, because that is really the only way that it will stop me from getting angry. If I read the Daily Mail and saw the way that they wrote things and constantly was looking at those kinds of articles, I would get quite frustrated and angry. So I think control how much news you consume. Try not to constantly be looking at different news sources throughout your day. Just section off a portion of your day that you're going to look at the news and read the news, and try to find balanced, well-written articles. from sources that you trust and from journalists that you trust, and try to keep on top of your mental health and mental well-being as much as you can. And if the news does get too tough, then just switch it off. That's always okay. You don't always need to know the latest line from Dominic Raab. You can just slow it all down and switch off for a few hours or a few days, and that's what I do on my weekends. I try not to look at the news as much as possible, just so that I can have a little bit of time to let my brain focus on creative things and happier things and things that make me feel a little bit more relaxed.